Welcome to the June 1st Select Board meeting. Please note that in accordance with the emergency orders announced by Governor Charlie Baker to protect public health during the COVID-19 outbreak, this Select Board meeting will not be open to the public for physical attendance, and the Select Board members are calling in via Zoom. The meeting is being live streamed and cable broadcast by Easton Community Access Television, which is Comcast 98 and Verizon 23, and on ECAT's website, www.eastoncat.org. If you're watching this at home and you have a question or a comment, you can email Michael Blanchard at mblanchard@easton.ma.us or pose your question on the Q&A feature of the Zoom portal. Please remember to include your name and street address for our minutes. At this time, I'd like to ask each Select Board member to state their name to ensure that we have a quorum.
Craig Barger.
Broussard.
Mark Lamb.
Chuck? I think Chuck is on mute.
Chuck King, sorry.
And Dottie Fulginiti. I'd like to move up the Select Board comments to this part of the meeting before we get started. Generally, the board does not comment on federal or state issues. And part of that reason is because we're a policy arm of the town, and these are essentially business meetings to conduct the business of the town. As we all know, there's been chaos across the country this week, prompted by the killings of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. This has impacted our community greatly. So I'd like to give the Select Board members the opportunity to comment, and we'll start in the order that we usually go, with Craig starting first.
Thank you, Dottie, for providing us the opportunity to address the residents of Easton about incidents of racism and violence outside of our town lines. As a member of the Select Board and the Human Rights Committee, I often struggle with the decision whether to make public my feelings on issues or events that occur outside of our town. But given the tragic and unnecessary death of George Floyd, perpetrated by law enforcement officers who are sworn to protect the public, and by the protests that have exploded across the country, I cannot stay silent. Sadly, this type of horrific violence occurs all too often to our citizens of color, and even has touched Easton directly with the tragic death of DJ Henry in New York at the hands of law enforcement only a few short years ago. I strongly condemn all forms of violence and am deeply saddened and, yes, angered when peaceful protests turn violent, as happened in Boston last night. However, I understand the anger that leads to violence. I remember vividly the violent protests in Detroit and other cities in the 1960s, the lashing out against the dual system of justice in this country, which sadly still exists today despite our best efforts. I am appalled by the insensitive words of this country's chief law enforcement officer, Attorney General Barr, whose words have fanned the flames of racial intolerance and show a deep misunderstanding of protesters' anger and the roots of the violence. As Congresswoman Val Demings of Florida, herself a former police chief, has said, Barr has missed the opportunity to call for unity and the opportunity to lead a federal response to violence by law enforcement. We need to stand up and be counted. We need to support racial tolerance and equal justice and opportunity for all our citizens. Quoting Desmond Tutu to end, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Tom?
Thank you, Dottie. I echo Craig's sentiments and express appreciation for you moving this up and affording us the opportunity to make comments today. I would like to say that I'm confident I will not be nearly as eloquent and as pointed as Mr. Barger was, and I fully support all of the points that he made and the importance that they have. I did have the good fortune yesterday to go with my family to the event for raising multicultural kids that was put together that I think brought our community gave our community the opportunity to get together. And for me personally, to begin to understand the magnitude of my own learning that I need to go through. And the reason why I say that is because at first I wasn't sure how or where or what I could do to interject myself to be a part of the solution. And as I looked at my young children, I realized that A, just showing up is a good first step. And B, much to your credit of giving us this opportunity, ensuring that we speak up and that we acknowledge the challenges that our society faces, and so many of those that are disadvantaged face, that are oppressed face, and that the issues of racism are prevalent and need to be dealt with. And so as I stood there last night, I can tell you at first, I wasn't sure, as I mentioned, where I fit into this solution. And as time went on, and even to today, I feel even more confident that it is so important that leaders like us use our platform to ensure that we express to our community that they must play an active role in order to fight against racism, to fight against violence, and that it is our role as stewards and leaders of this community, as parents of children, that we have to ensure we teach all, both children and those in our community, what is important to not just our little society and town of Easton, so to speak, but the example that we can fit in and set in Massachusetts and nationally. So I think everybody plays a role. And I was just so heartened to see so many people from our community show up yesterday and acknowledge that. And so thank you very much again for this opportunity to talk, Dottie.
Thank you, Tom. Chuck.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Even though we are able at infancy to determine that someone is different than ourselves, it is said that we have to be taught to be racist. Having grown up in urban Boston during the 60s, I lived in a household dominated by a racist stepfather. Any reference to a person of another culture or appearance was most commonly a one-word reference. One word if it were a dark-skinned person, another one word if it were a person of Jewish faith, another again if a person of Chinese, Italian, or some other country's ancestry. This was a racism formed not by guns and symbols so much, but racism built of language. Affiliated with that one word was a host of pictures in the mind that were inevitably not good ones. I went to the military early on, and many of the stereotypes persisted. When I hear the phrase, "I don't have a racist bone in my body," I have my doubts, because I myself have, throughout large portions of my early life, been taught to be racist. The teaching was not always by design or consciously, but it was taught nonetheless, oftentimes as a result of my parents' belief. As I am neither a person of color nor a law enforcement officer, I cannot fully place myself into their shoes. But I can try. How? I can try by recognizing what I have been taught wrongly, that a person should not be identified by one word or by one defining characteristic or by one's uniform, but by recognizing that the embers of the early racist teachings are there still and need to be challenged every single day. This is what I must do as an individual, what we as leaders in the town must do, and what we all must do as a community, as a state, and as a nation. With our language, we must recognize that each situation we meet is unique, that each person we meet is unique, and our old teachings may be outdated. We must plan and communicate with each other about the challenges that face us, and we must overcome them. I appreciate Chief Sullivan, who had come to the event last night. I was unable to make it, but he spoke about how the actions of a few reflect not only on the many, but also reflect on the failings of the system. How true, Chief Sullivan, and I thank you again for your clear and unequivocal comments on the subject. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chuck. And Mark.
Thank you, Dottie. Thank you, Craig, and Tom, and Chuck. I agree with all of your words. I understand to a degree where everybody's coming from. You know, in light of what has happened recently, I thought a lot about how does this impact Easton? Where does Easton, like, you know, an event occurs in Minnesota, how does that impact Easton? And there are hard conversations that happen. To be fully transparent, my brother and sister-in-law are the ones who founded Raising Multicultural Kids. That group was born out of a racial incident that occurred with their daughter. And even conversations that I have with my own brother sometimes are difficult. They're hard at times. Sometimes I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. And the first step is putting yourself out there. Tom, you had mentioned that, you know, being there was the first step in entering into this arena of taking a side, to which Craig pointed out. I think you're absolutely spot on. And, you know, what we see in Minnesota, how does Easton play into it? These events happen all over the country. Sometimes when the cameras are rolling, sometimes when they're not rolling. And it's been happening for decades and decades and decades. And now we're able to see it. And I don't know if it's happening more or less, or it's just being captured more. But at some point, we know that, you know, there aren't, in the town of Easton, we have never had an event like that occur in Easton. We've had one of our own suffer and die in New York because of an event like that. But in Easton, I think it's important that our community know who we are, what we stand for, and what we stand against. And so, you know, being there last night at that event and seeing all those people come together, it was a really calm, peaceful, it was a really incredible experience just to see all those people come together and hear the names of people, one after the other, after the other, after the other, lost for nothing. So Dottie, I thank you for allowing us this opportunity to speak and demonstrate to our community, specifically the people of color within our community, that its leaders, its police chief, we condemn wholeheartedly all of the actions and any actions like what happened in Minnesota. And this is not a community that represents that at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Well, for my comments, I guess first I'd like to thank Chief Gary Sullivan for putting out a statement condemning police violence so quickly, and to let him know and let the community know that I'm grateful for our law enforcement officers. They are well-trained and compassionate men and women that serve our community well. This year, I had the opportunity to visit the Center for Civil and Human Rights in Atlanta. When I was walking through the exhibits, I imagined what it would be like to be there when somebody was turned away from using a bathroom or a water fountain or not allowed to sit at the front of the bus. And I immediately thought, if I was there, I would have stood up for those people. But then I wonder, would I have been scared, or would I really have been brave enough to stand up to an angry crowd? Right now, a baby will be born into a pandemic at a time of great social unrest. And that baby might be the new Ed Hands or the new Hazel Varela. In 50 years, they'll be walking groups of students through our town, looking at the beautiful architecture and sharing the history of the Ames family. But they'll also be talking about the year 2020, when our country experienced a pandemic, a year where more than 100,000 Americans died from a virus within a very short few months, and a year when many businesses teetered on the brink of collapse, a year where social unrest was at a boiling point. But what will they be saying about us? We're making history right now, and it makes me think, how do we want our great-grandchildren to remember us? And what are we willing to do to stand up against racism and acts of violence against people because of the color of their skin? I'd ask our community to listen and learn, educate yourself, reach out to a person of color in our community and ask them, are you okay? And ask how you can be a supportive ally. Last night, as Mark and Tom and the others alluded to, there was a peaceful demonstration in Easton that was put on by the group Raising Multicultural Kids. And it was just amazing and incredibly moving how the community came together to mourn and comfort each other, but also to stand together to unify against hate and injustice. So if you want to learn more, I would recommend looking at the resources on the website, raisingmulticulturalkids.com, or the Human Rights Committee on the Town of Easton website, and you can volunteer or donate to either organization. But let's just remember, we're making history right now, so let's work together for positive change. So I hope that people are watching this, and I hope that they're very clear about where this board stands. And I really thank my fellow board members. Your comments were very, very moving and very heartfelt, and I really appreciate that. So with that, we're going to go on to the first item on the agenda, which is a discussion and vote for the nomination of the Inspector of Animals, Jordan Holbrook and Leanne Meehl. Just trying to balance a lot of windows open on the computer at the same time. Hang on 1 second. So we have a memo that was submitted by Kristen Kennedy, nominating Jordan Holbrook and Leanne Meehl to serve as an alternate on the as an animal control officer. Once nominated, Ms. Holbrook and Ms. Meehl will need to accept the nomination, and their paperwork will be sent to the state for their action and appointment. Connor, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
No, this is an annual appointment that is made every year, typically at the end of April, but it slid a little on my end just because of everything going on. So I would just ask if the board make the appointments through April 30th next year for both Ms. Holbrook and Ms. Meehl.
Okay, great. Can I
a
get
motion
a
to approve?
second and a roll call vote?
Chuck already said motion, and I'll second it.
Okay, and the roll call vote?
So I've got, let me just, Holbrook and Leanne Meehl, Barger. Yes, Barger.
Broussard, Holbrook, Meehl.
King, Holbrook, and Meehl.
Lamb, Holbrook, Meehl.
Fulginiti, Holbrook, Meehl. Thank you. Next is a discussion and vote for a contract award, landfill monitoring for a contract with CDM Smith.
Sure. So in your packet, there's a memo from DPW Director Dave Field for $59,700 contract for professional services related to environmental monitoring and operation and maintenance of the gas collection system at the closed landfill at 114 Prospect Street. This is an annual contract award that is required by the town as part of our landfill closure permit. The funding for this is contained within the Department of Public Works operating budget. Director Field recommends award, and so do I.
Okay. Any comments or questions?
This is
Question
Chuck.
in
I've
the-
asked-
I'm sorry, Chuck. Go ahead, Chuck.
Yes, Chuck King, I just wanted to know, Connor, I think I've asked this last year, but is this contract sort of like a perpetual thing, or at least until something changes?
Yes, you did, and the response from Dave at that time, it was as it is now, which is it's functionally in perpetuity.
Okay,
Great.
thanks.
Craig Barger, Connor. Just a quick question. I noticed in part of the material, there's a statement by CDM Smith that there's a tear in the covering of the landfill. Is that something we've known about, or did I misread something? Or
And I'm not positive. What, can you point me to a page number?
no, unfortunately, I don't have that in front of me. But it was in their one of their, I think it was in the page that had the ongoing list of activities that they do every year.
I'm flipping through it now.
Well, it might have been that it said that if there was a tear, but I thought maybe it said there was a tear, but I'm not sure.
Yes, I without reading through the whole thing front to
Right,
back,
right.
can't.
I'll go back and
that
find
if
it.
Like the board can delay. I believe that probably would have been noted.
All right, I may have misread it. And it talks, it may have been just talking in terms of if there was a tear, it would be an additional cost. So we
Correct.
can move on.
Page 12. Sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute. At the bottom, as you are aware, tear in the liner at the landfill will require repair.
Right.
Cost
Okay. Yeah. And will be added as a later amendment when a scope of work and estimated costs for repair are obtained. Okay. So that's not associated with the ongoing monitoring that's required regardless of that. But if that is the case, that would have to come through a successor memo through Dave Field and CDM with a separate scope of services that, depending on the price of it, would have to go through the board for any award.
Okay, thank you.
So can I get a motion to award the contract to CDM Smith in the amount of $59,700?
Barger, so moved.
Second, Broussard.
Roll call?
Barger, yes.
Broussard, yes.
King, yes.
Lamb, yes.
Fulginetti, yes. Okay, next, the Southeastern Regional Services Group contract for contract award for paper supplies. Connor?
Hi, Dottie. It's Michael Blanchard. Just a brief overview for the benefit of the board and the public. The Southeastern Regional Services Group, or also known as SERSAGE, is comprised of 23 cities and towns in the surrounding Easton area, Bristol, Norfolk, and Plymouth County. And we benefit from shared procurement services and group cost savings. We actually were a founding member of the SERSAGE Group in 1993, and they do routine procurements, I think 6 each year: DPW services, DPW supplies, drug and alcohol testing, office supplies, paper, and water and sewer treatment chemicals. So this is an annual item, and the prices shown are not, they don't oblige the town to make any specific purchases, but these are the bid prices that SERSAGE received, and SERSAGE recommends that you approve the contract awards. And this applies to the next 3 items.
And so this contract would be estimated at $29,530.70.
So this is a little different in that it's not a contract in that we're required to spend that amount, but if we were to spend the estimated volume, yes, but we're only, there's no obligation to purchase a minimum amount, but you'll see the unit prices are what we're getting as part of the award.
Okay, great. Any questions? All right, would somebody like to make a motion to award the contract to the SERSG paper contract award to WB Mason Company?
So moved.
So
Barger.
moved. King,
King made the motion and Barger second. Okay, roll call.
Barger, yes.
Broussard, yes.
King, yes.
Lamb, yes.
Fulginetti, yes. The next SERSAGE contract award for water and sewer treatment.
Dottie, this falls under the same umbrella of the SERSAGE supply contracts that Mike just touched on, that these give you basically unit costs, but that and an estimated contract value, but that the actual spending is based on the actuals that we need.
Okay, great. Any questions on this one? Could I get a motion and a second to award the water and sewer treatment chemicals to IBF? No, wait a minute.
Harcros Chemicals Inc. and Roberts Chemical Company.
Okay. Like Tom said.
So moved.
So moved.
There you go.
Who made the motion?
Mark.
Mark, and seconded by,
Tom.
and Craig, all in favor?
Barger, yes.
Broussard, yes.
King, yes.
Lamb, yes.
Fulginiti, yes. So item number 6 is another contract for Southeastern Regional Services Group. Contract award for DPW supplies to Lorusso Corporation, Boro, Sand and Stone, John Hoadley and Sons, and G. Lopes. So these are DPW supplies for crushed stone, gravel, loom, fill, concrete, manhole frames and covers, manhole rings, and other assorted DPW supplies. Any questions on this one? Would somebody like to make the motion?
So moved, King.
Second, Barger.
And this is to award to Lorusso, correct, Connor?
Yes, Lorusso, Boro, Sand and Stone, John Hoadley and Sons, and G. Lopes.
Okay. Craig, all in
Barger,
favor?
yes.
Broussard, yes.
King, yes.
Lamb, yes.
Fulginiti, yes. And item 7, discussion and vote for an authorization of Dottie Fulginiti as chair and Connor Reed as town administrator to sign and submit fiscal year 2020 CARES funding applications on behalf of the town of Easton, and to authorize the same and execute and submit any additional documentation, applications, or instruments necessary to secure CARES funding for fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 2021 eligibility periods.
Thank you, Dottie. That is basically a really technical and specific way of saying a vote to allow us to submit an online application for CARES funding. As the board is aware, and as is included in your packet, there was in mid-May guidance distributed by the Commonwealth's Executive Office of Administration and Finance, providing a framework under which cities and towns in Massachusetts can apply through the state to receive portions of their allocated CARES funding under the CARES stimulus bill. So we've touched on this a little bit just as part of talking about the condition of the town's budget overall. And for anyone who's seeing this for the first time, it's really important to remember that there is important financial aid for cities and towns included in the CARES Act. And in Easton's case, it's $2.2 million. However, the use of those funds is highly restricted to COVID-related items that were not budgeted prior to the pandemic. It cannot be used for revenue shortfall offset, which is unfortunate because that would be tremendously helpful, but that is not an option. So instead, it can be used for a variety of other items, the purchase of PPE, overtime for public health and public safety responses directly related to COVID, technology for remote learning and things like that. So although it's not as flexible as we would hope and that we would like, and there are conversations ongoing to see if the United States government would be willing to allow that, it does still have a major use for the community. Finance Director Nightingale is on the meeting and can speak in specifics to any questions the board has, but we have a deadline of this Friday to request the first disbursement of funds for fiscal 20. So it's a program that runs through the end of calendar year 2020 that obviously straddles 2 fiscal years. So we need to ask for a certain amount of funds now, and the remainder can be sought at a later date in fiscal 2021. At this time, we're recommending, I believe, roughly $390,000 of request of that CARES funding to offset overtime incurred by first responders, public health agents, for purchase of personal protective equipment for the same. And that would leave roughly 1.8 million of CARES funding eligible in fiscal year 2021, which is important for a few reasons. One is holding out hope that perhaps that money's use becomes more flexible. And 2 is that, as we've learned throughout this pandemic, it is, the world's changing on a day-to-day basis. And there will be costs that we as a town and the schools as a school district are going to have to incur come fall that we probably can't even imagine right now. So I think it is beneficial to have the larger portion of this funding available for fiscal 21 to meet some of those needs, because obviously we, remote learning and all that has been an incredible endeavor for public schools across the United States. But assuming children are reentering buildings in the fall, there's going to be all sorts of supply and personnel needs that we have not yet quantified, and the guidance does not yet exist. So we think this is a conservative ask that addresses what we need right now and is reflective of the COVID deficit account that we structured and set up explicitly for this purpose. So I'm happy to take questions on any of that. And Wendy, if I missed anything you would like to add to that, feel free.
I just wanted to add that whatever money that we get for fiscal 20 that we don't spend will be rolled forward to be used in fiscal 21.
Great. Any comments or questions from the board? Okay, so all in favor of authorizing me and Connor to sign and submit the CARES funding applications?
Do you need a motion?
A motion and a second.
So moved. Broussard?
Marjorie, yes.
King,
Broussard, yes.
King, yes.
Lamb, yes.
Fulginiti, yes.
Thank you. We will get that submitted to ANF this week and get a copy to the board.
Great, thank you. Now up next for item 8, discussion regarding the fiscal 2021 operating budget change memo number 2. Connor.
Sure. So up on screen, it's a little bit blurry. I apologize for that, but and hopefully whoever is doing the screen grab has us in the corner enough so that the numbers are viewable. But I'm just going to kind of touch on the key points of the budget change memo that I provided the board yesterday that we'll put online tomorrow morning and distribute to the public as well. As we kind of touched on May 18th, it was difficult then to talk about matters that generally seem pretty mundane, like municipal operating budgets in the face of a pandemic, and that it almost feels cold to do so, but that the reality is that our capabilities to respond to these things are tied intrinsically to budgets. It feels doubly more so now with the events that have transpired in the past couple of weeks to be talking about dollars and cents. But because of the timeline we're on, we must. So for whatever extent it is reasonable, forgive the fact that we need to be having this conversation in light of the civil unrest and pain in this country. But we need to work through this. So the changes to the memo on May 18th, we outlined that based on forecasts we were seeing from economists, that we could anticipate a pretty significant revenue shortfall, particularly in state aid and local receipts in Easton in fiscal year 2021. That led to a projected deficit for the town's budget of about $2.475 million. This budget change memo reduces a deficit from about $2.5 million down to $1 million and change. And I'm going to go through this on a revenue side first, and then the expense side. For anyone who's watching or seeing what's up on screen, you could see moving from left to right, you have the categories of revenue and expense, what those levels were in 2020, where they stood at our last meeting on May 18th, and then what the adjustments we have made to each of those categories are to arrive at the adjusted budget today on June 1st. So on the state aid front, revenue side, unfortunately, newer forecasts that have been coming out, including basically the week that I delivered the last budget memo, revisions to the Massachusetts Taxpayer Foundation report and other reports from Pioneer Institute and other think tanks have generally shown an even more devastating picture for state revenue expectations in fiscal 21 than what we had based our assumptions on for that May 18th budget. Specifically, the big headline a lot of folks were paying attention to was a projected shortfall for Massachusetts tax collections next year of $4.4 billion. Most projections have now upped that to $6 billion. Senate President Spilka has been quoted saying perhaps $8 billion. We're now talking 20 to 25% of the entire tax collection pot for the state of Massachusetts. However, Wendy and I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and we have consistently tried to tie our forecasting to the current economic data to the extent we can, so that we don't overshoot our expectations next year. But at this time, we're kind of faced with a choice where we can just plug $6 billion into a formula instead of 4.4 and cut our assumption on state aid another 200,000 to 500,000. However, with the amount of uncertainty and the fact that we still don't even have a real timeline from the Commonwealth on when they plan to adopt a budget, the earliest they may report a budget proposal out maybe July 1st. We think that it's the more conservative middle path forward is to proceed with trying to balance the budget based on our May 18th revenue expectations, but use that to basically have a downside forecast and a eyes open expectation for a potentially brutal fall, where we would need to offset additional revenue drops if state aid does trend down even further in the amount of 250 to 500,000. And because of where we are with our budget, that would need to be done entirely through cuts to services or through additional reserve use. So I think that we are basically in the business right now picking the least bad option, to put a point on it. And I think that is the correct path. And I'm going to touch on that when I get to reserve use, and then I'm happy to take questions on revenue before getting into expense. But we made some minor adjustments on local receipts. As was pointed out at the last meeting, our initial forecast may have been a little bit too optimistic. We went back in and looked at a little bit more data. We're going to be reducing our excise tax assumption to a decrease of 5% over the budget from fiscal 20. This is still conservative, admittedly. And there's no exact science on what statistic you want to pick. But if you look just at April, auto sales down 54% over last April, even if we wanted to engage in magical thinking where the other 11 months of the year sales were normal, that 1 month with that significant of a drop off in economic activity is roughly equivalent to 4.5% of annual car sales. And if you track that to your excise bills, which are tied to car sales, 4.5% is probably the rosiest one you can go with. Wendy has touched base with colleagues in various communities, and people are going generally with between a 5 to a 15% projection in losses there. So for now, we're moving that down slightly to 5%. That brings the revised fiscal 21 local receipt projection to 6,791,000. It's a decrease of $557,000, or just about 7.5% from what we budgeted for this revenue category last year. Touching on reserves. So this budget revision now includes the use of 500,000 in stabilization fund dollars. Much attention rightfully has been paid to the town's improved reserve position today compared to the more recent past. As the board is fully aware, but I think is always worth reiterating, this is the case because of a conscious and deliberate financial plan based on the select board's adopted fund balance policy, which was put forward in 2016. And because of that, we have built our stabilization fund up from about 1.6 million in June of that year to 3.2 million now. If we look at reserve use narrowly and only from that perspective, the inclusion of $500,000 of stabilization funds may seem somewhat inadequate or insufficient to meet today's challenge. However, it's important that when we're talking about reserves that we look at the full picture, and that full picture is obscured unless we also account for the use of free cash. Our reserve fund balance is the product of two things. It's not just our stabilization fund balance, it's also the free cash that we have on hand. Our most recent total reserve position, which is calculated at the close of every fiscal year, was 4,638,000. The total reserve that figure, about 4.64 million, is the appropriate one from which we have to make judgments about the sufficiency of our reserve use in the coming year's budget. So the budget, this iteration of a budget includes something new, which is $500,000 of stabilization fund use. But it's important to remember that's getting added on top of $909,000 of free cash use. So we are allocating roughly $1.4 million of reserve capacity for this budget for next year. That's roughly a third, about 30% of that 4.64 million reserve fund balance. So it's important to keep our eye on that. And it's important for a couple of reasons. The first is that given the severity of challenges we're facing and the difficult decisions that have to come on the expense side of a budget to balance it in these circumstances, it's tempting to more immediately deploy a larger share of our reserve capacity. But it's important that we remember our past experiences from the last recession and the one preceding that, as well as the expert reporting of economists and observable reality that we know that even if the economy begins to recover from a pit in July, that it usually takes on average 5 years for state tax collections to recover to pre-recession levels. And we know that most recently in Easton, it took us 8 years for our state revenue to recover to where it was before the recession. So we simply can't afford a strategy that is going to over leverage and overextend our reserve use. This also ties back to how I started the conversation about revenue, that although narrowly 500,000 in reserve or 500,000 in stabilization out of 3.2 million may seem insufficient, if we do this, it would be part of a conscious understanding that it's entirely possible that our revenue forecasts may pan out to be too optimistic at this point, and that we may need to hit reserve fund use more in the fall. Whatever dollar we allocate right now of reserve money is a dollar that we cannot draw on in the fall. So it was just a long way of reiterating the point that we often make here, that being judicious in the application of reserves is really critical, because we need to be thinking about this in 3 and 5 year increments, as almost impossible as that seems right now in the face of such significant and rapid change in the economy and the pandemic, and with just the unrest in the United States. It is our job and our responsibility to be thinking that way. So that is what has informed the reserve strategy I'm building this on. The net of those revenue choices is an increase to projected general fund revenue about 438 grand, which puts us at 873,000 over fiscal 20, which is 1%. Before getting into expenses, I'm happy to take any questions from the board on the revenue assumptions here.
Just have some observations, Connor, if that's okay.
Always.
I was looking at in our annual budget book that we put out, which is the volume of incredible information that I think is very important for everybody to review during these times. I was looking at the specifically graph on the use of the free cash and stabilization funds for operating budget purposes. And it goes all the way back to 2007. And I won't ask you to cite from memory, but from my math, it looks like we probably used in 2009, $250,000 worth of stabilization. It escalated in 2010 to somewhere just shy of $1 million. I'll call it maybe 800,000 round number. And then in 2010, it looks like, or 2011, it went over $1 million to probably $1.1 million worth of use. And I apologize for using round numbers. But the point that I'm trying to make is that to your, to support your point about this is a multi-year discussion in the use of stabilization funds, and that we do have an example of when we as a community used it lastly. And I will simply also add on to that, that the free cash usage in those periods of time as well. At 2009, it looks to be just around $1 million, close to what we're talking about today. And in 2010 and 11, it went over $1.5 million. And so while I'm not saying that these are exactly the same events, they do give us some insight into the last time we faced economic challenges, the type of investment that was required in terms of use of stabilization funds and the use of free cash. And I just think it buttresses your cautionary words about being judicious as to how we use this resource that we have at our disposal at this point in time.
I have a comment as well.
Thank you, Tom.
I am not at all tempted to spend more than 33% of our reserves. I understand people in the community might want that to keep things as close to where they are now as possible. But in Connor, everything you had mentioned, Tom, everything you had just mentioned, prior to being in this role as selectman, I was on the finance committee for over 4 years, and I've watched the absolute struggle it was to get our reserves to where they are and how fast they can be depleted. And if we're spending 33% of our reserves to almost transition into this next version of what Easton will look like, at that trajectory, we can't continue to spend that 33%, because before you know it, you'll be out. You won't be able to maintain as you were. More people will be laid off, and you will be left with nothing. So I am. My mind is conservative in the approach of how we spend our reserves, and I think it's right in line with what you guys were talking about. But I just wanted to make that very clear. I'm not tempted to spend more than 33%.
Anyone else?
Dottie, it's Craig. I just want to support not only Mark and Tom, but Connor and Wendy in the very comprehensive approach to budgeting. And I concur that spending more than 30 or 33% of our reserves makes little sense, since we're probably looking at a multi-year revenue deficit, given the projections I hear from the state. So I concur, and I support what you, Connor, and you, Wendy, are doing at this point.
Terrific.
Connor, I do also want to highlight one other aspect that I believe you mentioned or alluded to, and I think it further supports the comment we're making regarding judicious use of our reserve funds. And that is that the last time, in terms of the recession of 2008, 2009, state aid actually bottomed out from a dollar perspective in 2012 after that. And so to your further point, it took a while to get back, but it always surprised me about the timing in terms of the delay in the full impact of the state aid from that economic crisis.
Mhm.
And so leaving some stabilization use or being judicious early is going to be, I think, important as we weather this in the years to come, to the points that were just made.
Yeah, thank you. And those are all good points, and they're all true. We know this is a marathon, not a sprint, and it's difficult to reorganize our operations and make painful requests for concessions from folks, but that is part of a deliberate strategy with this reserve use, so that we can, although in a reduced capacity, preserve some level of functionality for the town and for the schools. None of us touched on the fact that obviously there are longer term impacts. If you too quickly spend these accounts down and you don't have a plan for rebuilding them, that is not viewed positively by bond rating agencies. And we are in the process of borrowing tens of millions of dollars for a brand new school. So we don't want to really go at this in a naive manner right now. So I appreciate the support. So that the revenue changes are a move in the positive direction on the revenue side of about $438,000. Most of the movement since the last budget memo has come on the expense side of the ledger. So just to talk through what those are, on May 18th, I explained the critical role that labor concessions and collaboration with our employees is going to play, or will hopefully play, in our ability to preserve the maximum number of jobs and operational capacity for the town government in fiscal 21. I'm pleased and proud to report that since then, numerous town unions, specifically SPIA Department of Public Works, the Professional Administrative Employees Association, and SPIA Clerical Unit have agreed to a complete wage freeze, joining with all non-union town personnel, including our department heads. In total, these wage concessions by about 75 town employees, representing just shy of half of our labor force on the town side, will save about $169,000 of spending next year and reduce our deficit by the same. I cannot say enough how much I commend all these employees for their leadership and their willingness to forego well-earned wages in an effort to help preserve services for the community. These are contractually obligated wages that these folks are giving back effectively to the community to try to do the right thing and pitch in to help solve a problem during an incredibly trying time. So I really cannot say enough how much I appreciate them coming to the table with that. Outside of the unions I just acknowledged, the other town unions have rejected proposed wage freezes. The town's not alone in this. School staff, including a superintendent's wage freeze and concessions from non-union school personnel, will save roughly $40,000 in the budget next year. As of this weekend, only one school union had agreed to a wage freeze, and that's the food service unit. And they deserve to be recognized and commended for their leadership in doing so. The other 7 school unions have not agreed to a wage freeze. If that changes, that'll be noted in future memos, and any positive impact on deficits will be incorporated as well. So the town concessions achieved so far are incorporated in revised departmental budget projections that you see on the table here, as well as in the memo I provided you. We are getting to some pretty lean numbers here. We're looking at 1.4% increase now for town government and 2% for Easton Public Schools. The remaining cuts from here are going to largely be accomplished through reduced expenses and personnel, which we will detail more as time goes on and we get closer to a balanced budget. So specifically on the town department side, you now see a number of $17,678,000. That is a cut of $262,000 from 2 weeks ago. This incorporates the wage concessions from town employees that I noted, as well as reductions in expenses in a variety of town department budgets in the amount of about $90,000. These are for things like training and for overtime. It's not ideal. It is not sustainable in the long term, but we are, again, in the business of making the least bad decisions right now, and the alternatives are worse. So the balance, the majority of our movement in cutting over $250,000 since 2 weeks ago is through voluntary concessions made by our staff. So again, I really can't thank them enough. School department budget has been reduced by almost $600,000 since the May 18th memo. It now reflects an increase of only 2%. Their efforts continue concurrent to ours to reduce their budget further to balance the budget. We're going to need to be nearing 0% budgets in order to do so. On the fixed cost side, our insurance budget's been reduced by about $100,000 to reflect planned savings from insurance premium incentive plans we've instituted over the past few years. The net impact on the expense side since 2 weeks ago is a cut of about $959,000 in expenses since May 18th. That leaves us at a projected increase in expenses of 2.39% over budgeted level of current year. Under normal circumstances, that would be an extraordinarily lean and marginal increase, and it's driven almost entirely by fixed costs. Unfortunately for us, due to the revenue circumstances we are in, we still have about $1 million to go. So the deficit revised as of today is $1,077,000. There's a summary table in your memo that gets into, basically quantifies everything that I just identified, but I'm happy to take any questions on the expense side.
Connor, it's Craig. We had some conversation at, I think, the last meeting about regional and county school assessments and whether there was going to be any possibility that they might agree to some kind of a reduction. or at least not an increase for this year? Have those conversations borne any fruit?
Wendy, have you heard anything new from finance at Southeastern Regional?
I have not heard anything new at this time.
So no, the conversations are happening, and the superintendent, Lopes, has been receiving letters from town administrators and managers, including us and Easton, from the communities represented, pleading for some relief there. And he has acknowledged that, and the school committee is working on it, but I don't have a timeline from them. We'll check in with them again, but no, there's no change currently reflected. And if you look at the table that's on screen right now, you know, I just mentioned the town budget for all town departments, police, fire, public works, our office, every town office. We're looking at 1.4% growth next year. We're looking for regional and county school assessment. It's 9.2% still. So we'll continue to push that conversation. And if we can, bring that number down. But that is typically considered a fixed cost for that reason. We do not actually have immediate control over it.
Right, and they would also have to be allowed to go below what their net school spending amount was,
Right.
because that's one of the things that's driving this, is that with the Student Opportunity Act, their new number was a lot higher. They benefited from that, and so as a result, our assessment went up.
Right, and so absent legislative action from a Commonwealth before town meeting on June 22nd to roll back commitments of the Student Opportunity Act, I don't think that number will change. If it does over the summer, we will adjust it in the fall. We will, just because of the nature of budgeting this year, we're going to need to be making budget adjustments at a fall town meeting no matter what. So hopefully in the fall, it's providing us relief.
So Superintendent Lopes has the full authority at this moment to simply say no, just for clarification, to simply say, no, I'm not going to work with you. That is the number.
I don't know if it's accurate to frame it as the superintendent's authority, or as more so than just a matter of
power, authority.
No, I know. I'm not trying to split hairs.
I'm just saying, but he can simply say no.
Wendy, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is my understanding, that as a school system, a regional school system that has a net school spend level, that is a required ask from them to us.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what we were told.
They have a school committee. They have a school committee also.
They do.
We have a representative on that committee.
We do.
Connor, have you spoken with Mike Petrowski about that?
Yes, so we do. I believe they are elected. Mike Petrowski, former finance committee member, is our representative on the Southeastern Regional Schools Committee. He and I had a lengthy conversation about this in May. He is aware of it, and he is committed to doing what can be done. But Mark, to your point right now, it's not clear if there is anything that can be done absent relief from Student Opportunity Act commitments and the associated net school spending level for the school. But the conversation's ongoing. I'm just trying to be honest with the board and the public that I do not think the $108,000 increase in that column is going to go away in the next 3 weeks, which means we need to account for it in our budget.
Connor, it's Craig. Forgive me, but I thought that the money for that for schools under the new law, the money had not been allocated. That it was simply a concept that they were hoping to be able to fund it, but that had they actually placed money into that?
No, there's no money.
Account?
No, there's no money placed anywhere for any account from a Commonwealth for fiscal 21, and the budget that they're working off of is the governor's budget.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no more formal budget, right? Which is part of our frustration and our challenges. Our fiscal year ends in 4 weeks, no matter what the Commonwealth does. Unless and until a new budget is issued with different Chapter 70 amounts, or there's some adjustment to the formula for the Student Opportunity Act changes, which were supposed to start being implemented on it over 7 years, beginning in fiscal 21, this is the number.
Right, but if that money is not allocated, given the $6 to $8 billion deficit, it's not a concrete number yet. Is that correct? It's a concept, but it's not necessarily real.
Yeah, it's fair to say that that's the case. So their budget is based on assumptions that have changed. just like ours. But they have different rules associated with that I am admittedly not expert in, and would fail trying to explain appropriately. But what I do know is that their budget is based on a net school spending amount that had anticipated the 1/7 implementation of the Student Opportunity Act beginning next year, which has not, in spite of $6 to $8 billion shortfall discussions, has not, to my knowledge, formally changed.
Thank you.
Dottie, any comments on expense side from any of the other board members? I can't see everyone on my screen. I apologize.
I guess my question would be, is that if all the town employees took a wage freeze, would that help us? How much would that help us close the budget gap right now?
You mean the remaining half who did not?
Yes. I know that's I'm looking for a rough idea. Would be
somewhere between, I would say, 150 and 200,000 more. So we'd still have 800,000 to go.
That was the town side. Did that include the school side?
No, that's just town staff.
Do you know the school side? I don't want to put you on the spot.
The exact number for the school wages.
I think of it in terms of how many jobs will it save, to be honest. That's how my mind is working with all of this.
Well, on the town side, I would rather talk about things that have happened than speculate about other union activities. So if we look at the money that has been saved, right, through town employees stepping up so far, it's about 170 grand. That's because we self-insure for unemployment, we pay those costs directly, right? So we don't net a complete savings. If you have 170 grand in savings, it's not as simple as saying that offset 170,000 in salary, right? Because of when you can't just cut 170,000 in salary, you then need to pay unemployment. So really I think it's fair to say that the concessions given by the 3 town unions so far are roughly equivalent to saving 4 or 5 town jobs.
That's incredible. That is incredible.
Yeah, they deserve a lot of credit for that.
Yeah.
And these unions have already made concessions in the last go around as well.
Correct.
So.
Yeah, and that can't, and to expound on that, so we're in a 3-year contract round right now. These groups had no obligation to entertain this. They already bargained over their wages and were awarded contracts. And all 3 of the groups that are agreeing to a wage freeze, and I think the language matters. When I say wage freeze, I don't mean just no cost of living adjustment. They are foregoing merit-based pay increase that they're entitled to under their contract as well. So whatever they're paid today is what they remain being paid at for next year. So this is a group, these 3 groups, as well as a non-union group, frankly, includes people like the police chief, the fire chief, the DPW director, the assistant town administrator, a handful of other staff. All of them took a 0 cost of living in 2019, which is the first year of this 3-year round. So to then come back and basically say, we think it's the right thing to do for the community and the right thing to do to balance the budget and the right thing to do to help out and preserve jobs, and agree to another year with no cost of living and no salary increases at all, is pretty extraordinary. You have a 3-year window where they're getting 2% cost of living cumulative. And again, to my point about expense cuts for overtime and training and things like that, that isn't a sustainable way to achieve structural change. Neither is this. We're getting a hand right now and people are helping us out, and that's great. You can't keep doing that every year, because we're going to have a hard budget next year. Fiscal 22 is going to be really hard too. And we're not going to be able to continue to kind of pull tricks out of the hat in this manner. So I'm not trying to be gratuitous in my acknowledgement and praise of it, but it's worth acknowledgement and praise.
Well, and I think it's important that people at home know that, because we're up to about 25% unemployment in our town. And, people are worried about that themselves. We've had people reach out to us and ask us about, you know, what that impact is going to be and what the tax impact to them is going to be. So
Yep.
I think it's important that people know that the town is really doing everything that we can to tighten our belt in every area. And still, we need to remain providing services. You can't close down, you know, these services. So for the employees that have stepped up, I really do want to thank them for that. We really appreciate it.
I agree, Dottie, and I echo that gratitude 100% for those who have stepped up.
Connor, this is Chuck. Forgive me if you've already alluded to how the cuts are expected on the town departmental budget expense cuts, 92,000 and change.
Sure.
How is that believed to be attained?
So this was part of a process where we basically went back through and started, I won't say zero-based budgeting, but pretty close to it, and just reassessing every single line item and shaving things down to the bare minimum we think we can sustain. So that would be cutting overtime budgets for police, fire, and public works, cutting training, cutting subscriptions. So, you know, for example, in our department, contractually entitled to certain dues and subscriptions, we're cutting them. Things like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Okay, we all concluded with this part, Connor?
Sure, just to set expectations moving forward, I think the board's probably meeting every Monday in June, at least till town meeting on the 22nd. I will continue to issue budget updates on a weekly basis, and the town meeting is going to come really quick. So we still have $1 million to go. I'm working very closely with Dr. Cabral. She and the school committee are working on this. We're going to keep moving this down to a balanced budget. It is entirely possible that based on posting deadlines for the town meeting warrant, we're not going to have a budget balanced before you are voting or posting a warrant. So we may need to have a more generic warrant article and have the dollar amount specified on the floor of town meeting with departmental specifics. But the next 2 weeks, we'll have continued changes in the budget, hopefully bringing it into balance.
All right. This is hard work. I really appreciate it, Connor, and Dr. Cabral and the school committee as well. All right, next up is the fiscal year 2021 capital budget.
Sure. So Wendy and I provided the board with the town's 5-year capital improvement plan over the weekend. And what that is, and it's normally included in our budget book, which Tom, I'm glad you actually brought that up. We will not have a budget book for town meeting this year for probably somewhat obvious reasons, but also just because things are changing too quickly and we are going to be coming in too close to the deadline to make it happen. Hopefully by the end of the calendar year, when things settle and we know what up looks like, we can revisit that. But so forgive the fact that you're receiving these documents separately and not in one unit as you are probably not used to. The 5-year capital improvement plan includes it's basically a roster of all capital improvement requests from all town and school departments and a 5-year programmed funding schedule contingent on revenue. And that last part's pretty important. If you're on the first page, and for anyone who's following along, this budget is in the town meeting warrant, which is public. What we have done, Wendy and I, is one of the last meetings we had before the state of emergency for coronavirus was declared was with the capital planning committee. So every year, my office and Wendy's office coordinates and receives capital funding requests from all town and school departments. We work on a prioritization list together with the capital planning committee, and they do a priority listing and ranking of items. The capital bylaw of the town of Easton is very well written. It's very prescriptive as far as what the general priorities are, and usually the bylaw does place life-saving equipment at the top. So because of the tremendous economic uncertainty, we are advancing, and I am recommending a very narrow capital budget article for the Springtown meeting that funds only emergency equipment related to life-saving operations or related to COVID, or limited items for public health or public works that are very time sensitive for other reasons. So I'll walk through them briefly. Again, this is also included in a warrant that's in your packet if you happen to have that open. So for spring in total, there were over 17 million in capital requests, 12 million of which was a water treatment plant for iron and manganese. I'm recommending funding of about 2.5 million. Almost all of that is water enterprise. So we'll talk through the general borrowing and funding strategy here. So items I'm recommending include an ambulance for a fire department. That is critical to their mission and is more so under current circumstances. It's $350,000. This is a planned replacement. Life pack defibrillators for a fire department. A $35,000 item for some necessary work on the school wastewater treatment plant in anticipation of the expanded use at that plant once the early elementary school is online and tied in. There's a $50,000 line item to tie Fire Station 3 into the sewer. The reason why I would advance that now rather than wait is because, as you and everyone who drives on that part of town knows, that project is underway. We actually are substantially complete with the sewer, and it makes sense for us to get a crew out there to do that tie-in now rather than to wait for all of the permanent paving and tear that up again. The majority of costs associated with this capital budget are in the water enterprise account. And that's important because these are projects funded either through cash on hand in the water enterprise account, which is not directly tied to the overall revenue collections for the general fund that are looking grim next year. And they include rather than the 12 million to advance a design and construction of the water treatment plant for iron and manganese, we're recommending $1 million at this time for the necessary design and scoping of that. We could revisit what the actual construction cost is in the fall. There is a water main replacement program administered by the department, which we're recommending continue to be the case. And we also are including 110,000, as we were talking about significantly before COVID, for a PFAS preparedness study for our wells 1, 2, and 4 to begin the process of investigating and designing engineered alternatives for PFAS treatment in Easton. I think those are all priorities. It brings us to a total capital budget of 2.548 million. So Wendy's on the call to add any detail or correct me if I misread something or answer any questions from finance department perspective. I'm happy to answer any questions from the board.
Connor, I just wanted to add, sorry.
Go ahead.
There's also a couple of other items here. We have, there are, in addition to the capital that the capital planning committee recommends, we also have capital items that sort of fall outside of the budget, but are underneath that $25,000 threshold. And we do have a few of those items that came from the fire department. So the chief had requested turnout gear, protective clothing. We are recommending 3 sets of those. So not the full 10 that he asked, but 3. And then also 11,200 for mobile data terminals, these wireless air links for the departmental vehicles for the fire department. So just those 2 things would be added as well.
Sorry, that was included in the 2.548 number.
Correct.
That I gave.
I was going to ask Connor, for the PFAS preparedness study, is there any opportunity for us to get some relief on that from any of the grants? I believe the governor had appropriated some money for that in the environmental bond bill.
We'll be applying for those, but at this point, we still need to proceed with allocating budgeted dollars for it. We do not receive it. but we will pursue the grant funding. Yes.
Great, thank you.
I would just point out, Connor, that I believe this is an important and what I would call hidden cost of the economic crisis we're facing, because it prevents us from investing into either our community via improvement in our roads. And I think we've heard extensively through great presentations from DPW Director Dave Field about the state that most of our secondary roads are in. And I think that this economic crisis is going to make it very difficult, if not impossible, to invest in rectifying that, which I think impacts, as we heard from many of our constituents in the community. And I think that the longer we do not make capital investments, that will place further operating pressure down the road on our budget. And so I think that this is just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I agree. It's a lot of attention is rightfully placed on the challenges that our operating budgets face during times of crisis, but one of the kind of most painful and long-lasting wounds that these crises inflict is that capital budgets end up under-resourced for years, as ours has been since the last recession. And unfortunately, absent major federal stimulus, is likely to be the case for a couple of years here again.
And best practices from municipal budgeting usually have about 7% of the budget should be spent in capital funds. And part of the reason for that is because the bond rating agencies look at that as part of your financial stability in the town, to know that you are reinvesting in your infrastructure. So it's really important to look at that number as a percentage of the total budget also.
Right. And that is something that we do adhere to, and we do quite well. Our borrowing strategies are informed by best practices. The challenge we have is that we do not have enough free cash for smaller or more routine recurring capital investments that we should be making, because free cash is also part of reserves that ends up being used in the operating budget, particularly during economic crises. So the borrowing piece we are managing well. The free cash one is going to be a challenge.
So if that holds, Dottie, is that 7% on the 82 million of revenues, or $5.7 million worth of expected best practice capital investment?
It's, to be clear, usually between 5 and 7%.
Fair enough. So
specifically. Yeah.
Well, the high end is 5.7 million, and we're basically less than half of that. So.
No, our capital is our debt service is sorry, to clarify Dottie's point, that was annual debt service spending.
I understand. Thank you.
Right, not the total.
Not this 2.548 million.
Correct. Yeah, no, next year, our debt service budget will be about 4.47 million, which is right around 5% of the $82 million operating spend. If not slightly above.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Connor. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the work of the Capital Planning Committee to do that. Right, next up is the standing update for the COVID-19 response in Easton.
Sure, I will try to be brief. This is part of every meeting we have now, just to kind of touch base and take any questions you may have. The town's emergency management agency continues to routinely meet and brief on the ongoing COVID situation, and now shifting towards incorporating and planning for the governor's reopening Massachusetts planning, the phases that are built in there. United States remains the hardest hit country. We are at about 1.8 million cases. More than 100,000 Americans have died, unfortunately, in a very short period of time at the hands of this pandemic. In Massachusetts, we are at about 97,000 cases as of yesterday. Just shy of 7,000 folks here in the state have lost their lives. We usually include what those stats were from the last meeting, just for a sense of scale. Cases, thankfully, have been trending in the right direction in Massachusetts. Daily positives are trending downward. Hospitalizations are generally trending downward, which is good. These are the metrics that are used by the Department of Public Health and the governor's reopening advisory board to make informed judgments on where the state is in its fight against COVID and when and how we would be moving into next phases of reopening. In Easton, our caseload has also, the rate of growth is slowing, which is reflective of, as I just said, in the Commonwealth. As of Wednesday, we're at about 260 cases. At our last meeting, it was 243. There have been some changes made through the Commonwealth's reporting down to municipalities on a daily basis. And so for that reason, those numbers are changing in a way that makes it difficult for us to put a daily case number out there. So we will be putting our weekly numbers every Wednesday up and tying to a much more detailed analysis that the Commonwealth also publishes for all cities and towns every week. We are working right now to finalize a protocol internally for estimating local deaths. That is a statistic that people are interested in. We're trying to go about that in a responsible and respectful manner to those who've lost their lives. And that should be included in future updates. The public health front.
Before you go on to that, Connor, just while I'm thinking of it, I just want to mention that, you know, when we look at the people that are really on the front lines of this, from first responders to people that work in the grocery stores to people that are doing the supply chain and the trucking, I think it's important to recognize our funeral directors and the work that they are doing and the risk that they're also taking, and the comfort that they're giving to families that can't put together, you know, more than 10 people to come in during this. So I just want to give a thanks to the funeral directors in our town that are doing an amazing job. I've heard some really great feedback from people in the community, and I think it's kind of an overlooked part of this whole puzzle.
Thank you. Well said. On the public health front, the Department of Health and Community Services, Board of Health continue to be working around the clock on their COVID responsibilities. On May 18th, the Governor's Reopening Advisory Board published the Reopening Massachusetts report. And that was a kind of hustle for all of us to read through lots of detail, lots of new standard protocols, including close to uniform protocols on workplace safety standards for businesses that can reopen in the current first phase that we're in. It is mandatory under the state's guidance that basically what's called a COVID control plan is adopted by employers, although they don't require that it gets submitted to anyone. The Board of Health, in consultation with Town Council, did adopt an order that Wednesday, stipulating that a copy of those plans, which are, again, required by the Commonwealth, be filed with the town. Because in theory, they're supposed to exist no matter what. This should not be creating a new administrative burden. And frankly, our health department and our first responders are the ones who will be involved in contact tracing and treatment if there is an outbreak anywhere. So the Board of Health, I think, made the right call there. The department has ongoing inspections and follow-up for contact tracing, gubernatorial order compliance, education, trying to put information out there. A lot is changing. It's frankly, if I'm being honest, difficult for us to keep up. I think, you know, the communication has gotten better. We are getting a little bit more advance notice usually on certain changes, but typically since March, it has been a pretty common occurrence that we on the municipal level find out certain changes in policy the same time the public does, and are often tasked with enforcement or education or getting that information out there. We have limited resources to do so, and we are doing our level best to do it. And that was not meant to sound as any sort of kind of excuse for delivering information, but just a real assessment of the challenge that we have and that Kristen's department has had. And so we're trying to push information out as we learn what our expectations are from the Commonwealth for enforcement and management of new phases. You know, for something as simple as fields being allowed in phase 1, but playground structures not being allowed, and what's the difference there, and what's the, if playgrounds are to be allowed again in the next phase, what are the standards that we're supposed to be meeting, and are those even actually doable? So there's a lot that goes into it. The Commonwealth's doing a good job, a better job now communicating that to us, but we do sometimes find that out pretty close to when everyone else does, making communication and ongoing challenging. So Kristen's department's doing their best there. We're trying to push stuff out for safe use of fields and things like that through social media. The schools have been helping us with that, and we appreciate that. On top of that, the health department's also working with just general assistance to all of our departments, whether it's for crafting appropriate employee policies and standards, for mask application when in common spaces in a building, or for assisting with elections. Tomorrow, there is a special election taking place at the town offices. The only personnel who will be here are elections personnel and health personnel. And Kristen's department's been working hand in hand with the town clerk, Danielle Sicard, to make sure that the experience is as safe as possible for everyone coming to vote. Public safety front, fire department successfully executed more than 140 COVID transports to date using uniform protocols for safety. Everything else remains largely the same from the last update. Public access to all but the Winthrop Street Police Station remains closed. We continue to source personal protective equipment. We are working on establishing a local cache so that we are ready in the event that there is a spike in cases, whether that occurs naturally through the reopening process or through transmission otherwise, to ensure that we have supply for our departments on hand. Municipal services. So part of the phase 1 opening gave some standards for office environments, that you are not barring certain processes for designating something as essential, that an office environment shouldn't have more than 25% of its staff in a building. As the board knows, the administrative personnel have largely been working from home throughout this crisis. There are folks, as you can probably tell, this is not my bedroom, who are in the town hall and at the town offices. And we are pretty close to that 25% threshold already, but it's on a department by department basis. And that would mean we would have one person departments, which would make opening for more general customer service quite a challenge, if not impossible. So we're working on trying to think how to incorporate that into remote service delivery, as well as what our budget constraints are going to very realistically be next year for personnel, for what things begin to look like in town moving into the future and into future phases of the governor's reopening plan. We have established a working team here for reopening Easton. It has representatives, I think, from the Economic Development Council, the Planning Department, and a variety of permitting boards. They're meeting up with and communicating with restaurant owners in Easton this week and working, Dottie, I believe you're on that team, to try to, while acknowledging, that we have a permitting and regulatory role to play, trying to work hand in hand with the business community to create an expedited permitting process for folks as they learn what they can do, restaurants can do in phase 2, trying to help out and make sure that we're there to work with people and not against them, because these businesses have been through a tremendous amount in recent months, and we want to be able to work cooperatively and collaboratively with them as they plan to reopen safely. Dottie, I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that.
No, the team really, like you said, want to make it easy for our restaurants and other businesses to open, make it very clear to them what is required and what's the time frame. We're working with the policy committee through the Mass Municipal Association to advocate for the governor or the legislature to move some articles that will help reduce some of the times. It's not as easy as saying, well, we can put some chairs and tables out in the patio. If we vote to extend the liquor license to an outside area as the select board, that then has to go to the ABCC in Boston before it can be enacted, and that can take several weeks for them to review and look at. And as you can imagine, so many businesses in the state are going to be trying to do that, which could create a real backlog for us. So there is some legislation in process to give us some relief on that. So that's just one example. There's other types of permits that are required, and so we're trying to just streamline it so that to make it easy and to relieve that burden, and to work with the restaurants in particular to see what we can do to help them get this moving along quickly. Because if they get the word on June 8th that they can open, they still have a lot of work to do after that. So
Right.
we can't, if it's a 30-day process or a 60-day process, that's going to be almost the end of summer.
Yeah.
So we really do need to do something very aggressive in making sure we can help them get moving along quickly on that.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point that I think shouldn't be lost is it's not simple, like Dottie said. It's not a matter of want. You as a select board or me as a town administrator can't just say, hey, you know what, I want to be flexible, ignore building code. Not that I would want to say ignore building code, but that's just an example. We have responsibilities to uphold certain state and local regulations and bylaws, including for posting periods and hearing notices and things like that, that just simply take time and don't really jive with the world right now. And so we're trying to find the right balance there to help people out without, obviously just throwing those things out the window. So we'll continue to work on that, and hopefully we'll have some good work to report in the coming weeks. Town clerk's leading an elections team. There's an election here in the building tomorrow. I'm in the building now. There's, social distancing markers on the floor for folks. There's plexiglass shields. Health inspectors will be on site to help folks. Masks will be worn. We've spaced out voting booths and made it as allowed for a second way to exit the building to make it as safe as possible for folks to come exercise their right to vote. Precinct 6 voters, obviously. So very proud of the work Danielle and the team are doing, and I look forward to that going smoothly tomorrow. That same team is meeting with Stonehill this week for logistics planning for a town meeting there on June 22nd, as well as incorporating those lessons in a very detailed elections contingency plan published by the clerk for the town election on June 27th. So that office will be very busy for all of June and then all summer preparing for November. And I think September has an election as well. This is, again, just a summary of the reopening phases. We're currently in phase 1. I believe the governor intends to give some advance notice before moving into phase 2. To this Commonwealth's credit, they have published and distributed through industry groups and to boards of health and restaurants associations do have these standards that will be expected of them in phase 2, so that they do have some time to begin planning and preparing. So that is very helpful for our business partners. And here's a summary of it. It's on their website. Then that's it from me from the town's work on COVID. I'm happy to take any questions or to just move into the next item with the board's discretion.
Any questions?
The only thing I would say is that it is so important for everybody to appreciate that there is as much and or more effort as we exit this crisis and pandemic as there has been put into in terms of solving it and addressing it and closing things down. And that it's just incredibly complicated. And Connor, I appreciate your and all of the team's engagement to help us navigate our way back out of this crisis, which is just as complicated.
Thank you.
I have a quick question, Connor, in regard to elections. I seem to recall that something I read said that people should bring their own flare pens. Is that correct?
I am unsure, but because that's obviously a really sensitive topic, we all should wait while I go to the clerk's website to make sure I get the answer right, because I certainly don't want to say the wrong thing there and have somebody feel dissuaded. If you give me
And Connor, it's Craig, I'm looking at it right now, and it says that to bring a pen, blue or black ink, Sharpie or Papermate Flare recommended, because the machines will not read red or highlighters, pencils or crayons. That's on the town election voting on election day. What do you need to know?
Thanks, Craig.
You're welcome, Jeff.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay. Next, we have the draft annual town meeting warrant review.
Sure. So at the board's direction, we pulled together a significantly truncated warrant for the annual town meeting. Let me just pull it up. I'm sorry. So in your packet, and it's available online for anyone who is following this, we have a warrant for the annual town meeting on June 22nd. That is 11 articles in total that are all related to financial and budgetary affairs in anticipation and hopes of pending state legislation, which would allow for the board to adopt a reduced quorum in order to maximize physical distancing during this state of emergency and pandemic. So this is a pretty brief warrant. I'll walk through article by article, and I'm going to ask two things tonight. One is that the board vote to include all articles. We are only 3 weeks away, and I'm going to seek your recommendation on a number of them that I'll address as we walk through, if you are so inclined. From there, we'll get this to the finance committee. If they can have a meeting before town meeting, that would be great. We'll work with them on that. But we're on a time crunch here. So not to bury the lead, but I believe that either at the last meeting or one before that, there had been discussion as part of a board giving consensus that you were amenable to a reduced quorum town meeting and a reduced warrant to fit. That there was discussion of desire if, wouldn't it be great if we could work with Stonehill again? They obviously have a much larger venues than we do. And I'm happy to report that that is possible and we can do that. So Stonehill has generously offered the Ames Sports Complex again for June 22nd. Our team's already working on logistics, but the general idea is it is a much, much, much larger space, which makes it a lot easier for voters to be safe, secure, and to feel comfortable participating and being spread out. The sports complex normally can fit thousands of people. It can fit a decent amount of folks, even if we're keeping everyone 6 feet apart. So it just creates more space and is more consistent with current health recommendations on safe practices. Obviously, there's no CDC guidelines on town meetings. Town meetings are kind of unique to our part of the world and country specifically. So we're working with the health department, with town clerk, moderators, Stonehill, Public Works, and Public Safety to have a town meeting at Stonehill once again. The campus is largely closed. We will not need large-scale transportation teams with busing and all of that. It'll be a significantly scaled-back event, but most importantly, will allow lots of physical space. So before we get into the warrant articles, if the board has any concerns with that, now would be the time to let me know, because the time is near and we need to get moving.
Connor, it's Craig. I'm very pleased to hear of your efforts and Stonehill's response to our need. So I thank you for that.
Sure. Thank you.
I thank you too. I mean, it was a lot of effort the last time, and I guess, having the campus closed this time makes a big difference too, and not having the same transportation and parking requirements, but still a lot of work to get that done. I think we may have even teased Mark a little bit when he threw that out there and suggested it. So I think that it's great that you guys were able to do that in such a short order. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. And that was a great suggestion. Great idea, Connor. Joking.
I'm not under promise and over deliver, right?
And you knocked it out of the park. But no, I do think it's a great venue. I think it will be done safely. And thank you to Stonehill. And yeah, that's it.
Yep, agreed. Well done, Connor. I think people's familiarity with it the last time will make it a little bit easier for all of us to execute this on.
I thank you as well, Connor, and Stonehill.
And thanks to Stonehill. For the record, I look forward to a day when we can just have normal town meetings again.
Miss those days.
That'll be the first time that this board will have met in person since February, I think.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we'll work together on that. We'll work with health and make sure we have good mask protocols and all those important things to keep everyone safe and comfortable and healthy. So let's work through some of these articles. Article 1 is relatively standard, but it is tied to the fiscal year and it's important. It is amending our revolving fund bylaw. It does two things. It establishes a fire and EMS vehicle and equipment revolving fund, and it also sets annual limits for all of our revolving funds, which we do each year. So as the board may recall, in prior years, we have established police and DPW vehicle equipment revolving funds where proceeds from the bidding and disposition of old and surplus equipment from those departments. Any proceeds from that can get reincorporated into basically a revolving R&M fund for those fleets. It's worked out well for Public Works and for police, and we are looking to establish and do the same thing for our fire department. So that's what this article also sets the annual limits for all of our other revolving funds. It's relatively standard fare. If the board doesn't have any questions or concerns, I would ask for a motion to include and recommend Article 1.
So moved. King?
Second.
That was Mark who made the second. Craig, would you like
Bar-
to?
Barger, yes.
Broussard, yes.
King, yes.
Lamb, yes.
Fulginiti, yes. It's unanimous.
All right, thank you. Article 2, again, standard fare. The town charter requires that the board annually vote elected official compensation. This is the same as it is every year. Board has no issues. I would ask that you vote to include and recommend.
So moved. Barger.
Second, Broussard.
Barger, yes.
Broussard, yes.
King, yes.
Lamb, yes.
Fulginiti, yes.
Thank you. Article 3 is the appropriation and authorization to expend Chapter 90 funds. This is an annual article that just basically grants the authority for us to be able to expend Chapter 90 once it is distributed to us for our roadway projects.
So we're looking
Make
for
a motion to approve. King?
Yes, I'm looking for a motion to include and recommend this article.
So moved. King?
Second, Barger.
Okay, and the vote?
Barger, yes.
Broussard, yes.
King, yes.
Lamb, yes.
Fulginiti, yes. Article 4.
Article 4, I believe Wendy is still on this call. This is typically in our warrant, but our warrant is not normally being pulled together this close to town meeting. Wendy, do you still recommend this stay in the warrant?
This article can be deleted. We don't have any prior year bills at this time. So if any do arise, we could always address them in the fall, at the fall town meeting, but we don't have any right now. And I don't anticipate that some are gonna crop up now at this late stage in the year.
Okay, so we'll just remove this administratively in the next issue of the warrant.
Okay. Article 5, supplemental fiscal year 2020 budget.
So Article 5 is a standard article that we include in every annual town meeting warrant. I believe, Wendy, we are still keeping this one in here.
Yes.
In the event that there are any updated or supplements of fiscal 20 budgets necessary, not relating to COVID deficit spending, which is a whole separate thing, this would be used on the floor of town meeting. There's nothing at this time, so I would just, as we typically do, I would just ask that the board take a vote to include, and that would be all.
So moved. Barger.
Second, Broussard.
Barger, yes.
Broussard, yes.
King, yes.
Lamb, yes.
Fulginiti, yes. Article 6, the supplemental fiscal year 2020 capital budget.
So Article 6, Wendy, can you actually speak to this one? I believe this is a boilerplate, but there's actually one minor specific thing here that's ready for inclusion now, yes?
Yes, this is this article. I was just looking through the packet, but I don't see it in there, but this basically is everything that we just previously talked about. So that total is that $2,548,534.
Sorry, Wendy, this was a fiscal 20 supplement for the
Oh,
charter.
I'm sorry. That was, I think the only thing we were going to put in there I'm sorry, I don't know if we have anything for that at this time. I think what it did relate to were the police cruisers,
Right, so,
because we had changed the purpose of the type of vehicle, because the vehicles that were originally going to be purchased were not available, and the other models were going to be more expensive.
correct. So it's a minor adjustment to an existing authorization in the fiscal 20 capital budget for the annual purchase of vehicles for the police department. The vehicles that were going to be purchased were not available from a vendor. So this was just adjusting that to account for the change in model.
Will we have a dollar amount posted in there at the night of town meeting?
We typically don't, but we can for this. Wendy, do you have that number by chance? I know I'm putting.
Actually, I don't have that number. I will have to get that from the chief.
So I would just ask at this time for a vote to include, and we can get the more information for the next meeting.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So moved, Barger.
Second, Broussard.
Second.
So that was Barger and Broussard. Craig?
Barger, yes.
Broussard, yes.
King, yes.
Lamb, yes.
Fulginetti, yes.
Thank you.
Article 7, approve funding for the Eastern Patrol Officers Association contract.
Sure. So Article 7 is the associated funding with the last collective bargaining agreement ratified by the town in this February between the town of Easton and the Eastern Patrol Officers Association. To be clear, this is not a funding impact on fiscal 21 as much as this is just the final step in the collective bargaining process that is standard place for all of our contracts, where this would allow for basically moving money that we had purposefully set aside in a collective bargaining reserve back in 2019 into the appropriate departmental budgets for wages and other items included in the now approved police officer contract. So again, these are funds. This is not taking funds from any bucket in fiscal 21. This is just moving and appropriating funds from a existing budget that we had planned for this exact purpose. So I would ask for the board to vote to include and recommend.
So moved, Barger.
Second, Broussard.
Barger, yes.
Broussard, yes.
King, yes.
Lamb, yes.
Fulginetti, yes. Next is Article 8 for the fiscal 2021 operating budget.
So as I alluded to before, the budget is going to be in flux, basically. Hopefully only until a week before town meeting, but perhaps closer than that. So I'm actually not going to ask. I would just ask that the board vote to include the fiscal 21 operating budget as Article 8, but to specify as such, because the text of the article might change based on that. But no, I'm not asking for a vote to recommend at this time because obviously we don't have a final balanced budget.
So moved to include, Barger.
Second, Broussard.
Barger, yes.
Broussard, yes.
King, yes.
Lamb, yes.
Fulginetti, yes.
Thank you.
Article 10, acceptance. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed Article 9, the fiscal 2021 capital budget.
Sure. So this is the capital budget that we just discussed. This is a significantly limited capital budget that takes the capital planning committee's recommendations and funds those articles that are related to life safety or that can't wait. I recommend that you vote to include and recommend.
So moved, Barger.
Second, Broussard.
Barger, yes.
King, yes.
Lamb, yes.
Fulginetti, yes. Broussard, I didn't hear a yes or a no from you.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Broussard,
didn't hear-
yes.
Okay, so that's unanimous. Thank you.
Perfect. Yep.
Article 10, acceptance of statutes related to veterans.
Sure. So the board may recall a previous iteration of this warrant. This was discussed with Veteran Service Officer Ahonen, I believe. right before the state of emergency was declared. The board and town meeting adopted certain state statutes, I believe either a year ago or 6 months ago in November, for certain tax exemptions for seniors in the community to assist with defraying the cost of real estate tax. There is a variety, and specifically there are 3 general laws in this article relating to exemptions and financial relief for veterans in Easton. These articles all come at the request and with the recommendations of VSO Ahonen. It would effectively establish certain exemptions that exist already, for one being the tax relief program that we are standing up that would be eligible for income-based applicants. This would add a veteran component to that for certain income qualifying veterans. It would also grant exemptions of property taxation for Gold Star parents or guardians of soldiers, sailors and members of the Guard who have died or who are missing in action. And I believe the third part is allowing there are veterans who under normal circumstances would qualify for a real estate tax exemption as a result of their military service. But if their home is not owned directly in their name, if it's in a trust, then they are not able to receive that exemption. The third component of this article would expand that tax relief and would allow for those folks to receive it, and the town would receive partial and in some cases full reimbursement of that exemption from the Commonwealth. So again, this is just kind of a host of financial articles pertaining to veterans associated with the BRAVE Act, coming from VSO Ahonen, that would provide some small measures of financial assistance to our veteran community during this economic crisis. The estimated impact to revenue is marginal, in the low 5 digits. If the board is willing, I would ask that you vote to include and recommend.
So moved, Barger.
Can I get a second?
Second, King.
And the vote.
Barger, yes.
Broussard, yes.
King, yes.
I am yes.
Fulginiti, yes. Article 11, report and fiscal year 2021 budget of the Community Preservation Committee.
Thank you. So this is the last article. Again, it is financial related. This is close to the pending legislation on financial matters for the community. The CPA committee must adopt a budget every year that has certain minimum allocations that I'll let Wendy speak to so I don't make a bunch of mistakes. But the important piece here is that this article establishes the fiscal 21 budget for the CPA committee, which includes the Affordable Housing Trust activities for 2021. So we are not doing any project funding right now as far as the town hall revitalization, Wheaton Farm Barn. Those articles are being delayed until the fall when we have a better picture of what the world looks like. But there are some items, particularly tied to the Affordable Housing Trust, that are pressing and time sensitive. And under revisions, Dottie, correct me if I'm wrong, either to regulations of the CPA from the state or state law, there are assistance programs that can be provided by affordable housing trusts for residents of communities for rental assistance so that they stay in their homes. And this is something that the Affordable Housing Trust is working on. This is something that is now being allowed of these funds by the state. Again, these are for existing residents of the community. This would include $250,000 for a short-term emergency rental assistance grant program in response to the COVID-induced recession and economic hardship caused by that. So Dottie, you've been involved in some of those conversations on the policy level. You want to fill in on that a little bit?
Yeah, this is an incredible opportunity for us to be able to help some of our people bridge the gap on very short term. I think it's 3 months of temporary rental assistance. And it's likely that Easton could receive that money back through the CARES program. So I think it's a great opportunity for us to help our people in Easton. We would have to work with an organization that would administer it. There's Fair Housing Act considerations. There's financial considerations for criteria. There's applications that have to be reviewed, et cetera. So we would work with an organization that does this. We wouldn't be doing it in-house. So I think it's really important to note that there is a process for this, and it would move pretty quickly. So I want to thank the Affordable Housing Trust and our new planner, Imai, for really being on top of this. And this is something that just came out, within the past few weeks. So we acted quickly on this, and it's great that we can get this done before our town meeting so we don't miss this opportunity.
Yeah, and to be clear, something that's really important, because these questions always come up, usually not directed at us, but the questions and the conversations happen where people look at municipal and public finance and say, what are you talking about? You're going to do a housing affordability program when you can't afford your operations. And it's super, super important to always take the opportunity to re-educate folks that CPA funds are not the same thing as our general revenue. And that CPA funds are collected in accordance with votes of the voters of this town to establish this fund, and that there's very stringent standards on the use of these dollars for recreation, historic preservation, open space, and affordable housing initiatives. And that this relief program is something that is being made possible by the state for CPA communities. So it's just really important if folks are going to look, especially in the coming weeks, as we get our operating budgets down to basically level funded 0% budgets, they're going to say, well, why don't you use CPA money? We can't. It's a matter of law. You cannot do so. You can't take CPA money and pay salaries in police or fire department or any town department or any school department. So I just think that that's really important. Always take the opportunity to touch on that because it's a question some people have and may not feel comfortable asking.
And we've done some amazing things with our CPA money over the years. Easton was one of the first adopters of the program, and the state matches the funds that we collect through a surcharge on the tax bill of 3%. So we, over the years, we've restored the gardens behind the library. We've done all kinds of works on historic buildings, made playgrounds, helped the housing authority. So if people are interested in this, you can go on, if you Google Community Preservation Act, you'll be able to get onto the website, and there's a list of all the projects, not only that Easton has done, but that other communities throughout the state have done. And it's really interesting to look back and see the history of that. And these are things that would have never been done if we didn't have that act. So it's really important. It's like having that little rainy day account in your own home for something that you want to do, whether it's a home improvement or a vacation. If you didn't put that money aside every time, you would never be able to do that. And if we didn't have this money set aside, there's a lot of things that are really vital to the community that make it what it is that we probably wouldn't have been able to do. So I appreciate the voters for continuing to support the Community Preservation Fund.
Does anyone have any other questions on the CPA article?
You're asking us to include and recommend or just include?
Include and recommend, please.
So moved. Barger.
Second, King.
Craig and Chuck, go ahead with the vote, Craig.
Barger, yes.
Broussard, yes.
King, yes.
Yes.
Fulginiti, yes. And Article 12 is just to transact any other business that may legally come before the meeting.
That's just a standard placeholder. We include them a warrant. No need for action there.
Okay.
Can we include it?
I feel like the answer is no, but that doesn't make a ton of sense. So I'm going to ask that you give me till next week to get it right.
Sounds good.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Plan.
And so next on the agenda is the town administrator notes.
I have nothing to add.
Okay. Select board notes?
I would just like, oh,
Go ahead.
I was just going to point out that I actually had the opportunity to go to High Rock over as part of our summer activities and see the construction that's going on. And as somebody who had seen it 20 years ago, for those of you that don't know, it's on the side of the Gilbert State Forest there in Foxborough. And so recently had the opportunity to go by there, and there was just an impressive amount of construction and getting it ready. And it was just impressive to see. And it looks really good and coming together well, Connor. So just thought I would pass that along.
Yeah, thank you. We'll touch on that a bit in one of the next budget memos, but that is one of the big changes coming to town before COVID was regionalizing dispatch, and that is still on target to occur the first quarter of fiscal 21.
It's great to hear.
And I'd just like to mention that I want to thank our Veteran Services Officer, Corey Ahonen, for the work that he did in trying to put together a Memorial Day reflection. And we didn't have the parade this year, which we usually have. So Corey did a great job pulling together a video recognizing and remembering those that we lost in the service. So I want to thank him for his hard work on that. He did a really great job.
Yes, thank you for that.
Thank you, Corey.
And next, the acceptance of the executive session, I'm sorry, the general minutes of May 4th, 2020.
So moved.
Second, Broussard.
So that
Marge?
was that Craig who moved that?
Yes.
Craig and Broussard, and the vote?
Barger, yes.
Broussard, yes.
King, yes.
Lamb, yes.
Fulginiti, yes. And next, the acceptance of the executive session minutes of May 18th, 2020. We would make a motion to accept but not release.
Correct.
Can I get a motion?
So moved, Barger.
Second, Broussard.
Barger, yes.
Broussard, yes.
King, yes.
Lamb, yes.
Fulginiti, yes. Okay. Michael, have we received any questions from the public while we've been on the meeting?
We have not.
Okay. And I don't see any questions in the Q&A, and nobody is raising their hand to ask questions. So with that, I would like to make a motion to enter into an executive session under Purpose 3 of Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, subsection 21A, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining in respect to the town bargaining units that may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the public body, and the chair so declares. We will go into this executive session not to return to open session. So I made the motion. If somebody would like to second that, and then we'll do a roll call vote.
Second, Barger. Barger, yes.
Broussard, yes.
King, yes.
Lamb, yes.
Fulginiti, yes. Great. Thank you so much. This will conclude the meeting. And thank you for being with us tonight, Wendy. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Wendy.